Suneater. This is what darkness promised. A world without fake heroes. His head hurt, limbs aching with the strain of holding off against a much stronger foe. Tamaki could feel the blood on his face. It trickled down the front of his forehead. The dried blood caked and cracked on his skin. The ground underneath him was uneven, cracks forming as Tamaki was repeatedly slammed into it. A Nomu had him pinned by his chest against the concrete slab. Cracking an eye open, Tamaki gazed at the monster holding him down, ready to let him up or split his head open upon Shigaraki's next command. The pale man stood away, scratching at his neck as he watched. How he saw anything past that hand that covered his face, Tamaki didn't know. He didn't want to know. The Nomu above groaned, getting the hero in training's attention once again. Its arms were short and thick, legs the same. A second pair of arms appeared to have sprouted from its back, as well as a second pair of legs lower down. Some deformed monkey. Tamaki gripped the large paw in his chest, and with what little strength he had left, he shoved at it. It barely moved. Tamaki groaned as Shigaraki began to speak, closing his eyes and letting his head rest back against the ground. Where were the others? Was everyone else safe? Did they get away? As the leader of the League of Villains began his lecture, Tamaki winced as the creature above him pushed harder against his chest. Tamaki couldn't stop the violent jerk as he coughed, blood splattering the creature's hand and his own costume. Something was definitely out of place in his side, or something was sticking out of him. This world, its heroes, its ideals. Shigaraki spoke from his perch on a solid concrete block. His figure was visible over the Nomu's shoulder, as Tamaki turned his head to his left. He panted, barely able to keep his eyes open. His body hurt too much. He needed backup, but no one was here. He doubted he'd be found in time. A world full of fake heroes. Shigaraki hopped down and disappeared from view. Tamaki could still hear his footsteps on the loose gravel, coming closer. He soon stood beside the Nomu, hunched over to look at the young hero in training. You could be so much more. You could show this world what a real hero looks like. He held his hand out to Tamaki, one pinky curled in so as to not turn Tamaki to dust upon contact. Tamaki closed his eyes again, groaning. No one was coming. He was alone. If Tamaki fought, he would surely die. But if he didn't, and he joined the League of Villains, he'd be going against everything he'd been fighting for. He would have to fight his friends, people who had stuck with him throughout it all, despite his shy personality and constant anxiety. People's faces flashed before his eyes. But no one was coming. He was alone. He was trapped, injured. Tamaki breathes. He can taste blood, and it makes him cringe. Live to fight for a just cause, hero. Shigaraki's voice is quiet, but Tamaki doesn't know if that's because he's choosing to speak quietly or if consciousness is slipping away. It can't end like this. There's so much Tamaki wanted to do. He had dreams. It can't end like this. Tamaki opens his eyes, screaming as he shoves against the Nomu, activating his quirk and wrapping the octopus tentacles around its middle and throwing it in Shigaraki's direction. I would never join such an unjust cause. He's on his feet, hand clutching his side as he pulls the tentacles back towards himself. Glancing around, Tamaki runs. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have backup. He winces against the pain in his side, stumbling, but managing to stay on his feet as he retreats. You call yourself a hero, yet here you are, running away. Shigaraki calls out, but Tamaki tries to ignore it. Dread fills him as he hears the thudding vibrations going through the ground. The Nomu chasing after him. There was no way he could outrun it. In a desperate attempt, Tamaki flings his arm out and slaps the creature, using the tentacles to attack it from behind as he stands in front of it, only a few meters away. The Nomu stops the claw behind it. Taking his chance, Tamaki turns to run, but he freezes. He sees a man trapped, unconscious, under nearby rubble. His heartbeat is all he can hear before Tamaki is running around to scream at the Nomu, his fear filling him, but also fueling him, angry at himself for not noticing the man and getting him out of there while he still had the chance. I am a hero, and my name is Suneater! Tamaki releases his side and shoots long tentacles from both of his arms to try to wrap around the monster and overwhelm it. Better in theory than in practice. Tamaki enveloped the Nomu, and for a moment it seemed to have worked, until Tamaki saw a dark blue arm jet out of his hold, grabbing one of his extended tentacle arms and swinging him up. Shouting in surprise, Tamaki was flung through the air, hitting the ground hard, rolling away. He pushed himself up from the road, but collapsed. He glanced at his arm, bent the wrong way. He felt tears prick his eyes, and pain made him spasm. The Nomu cried from the other side, looking at the civilian. No. Tamaki had to keep its attention on him. Don't touch them! His voice shook, but he managed to use it, wanting to just scream in pain. You made a poor choice, hero. Shigaraki's voice spoke angrily from behind him. Tamaki spun onto his back to look at the man towering over him. Gritting his teeth through the pain shooting down his arm, the hero in training desperately tried to come up with a plan. A solution. Anything. Bye-bye, hero. Shigaraki lowered his hand to Tamaki's face. Tamaki couldn't move. He gasped, but he couldn't move. He wasn't sure if his legs were broken, but he couldn't make himself stand up. His arm still bent. He only had one arm that was still intact. He gripped Shigaraki's wrist, pushing him to keep it away from his face. The other man above him grinned as he pushed down with his fingers spread, pointing down to touch Tamaki. If all five got to him, he'd start disintegrating. No, no, no! Tamaki pleaded. He wasn't asking for the villain to let him live. He was begging his body not to give up yet. He had to push through this. No one was coming. He needed to survive to get that civilian out of here. As Tamaki looked over at the man, the Nomu hadn't moved after it had thrown him. Kill him, Shigaraki ordered, and Tamaki gaped in horror as the Nomu started towards the unconscious civilian, hopeless. Lifting his broken arm, Tamaki bashed it against the villain. Tamaki cried out as his arm moved, pain shooting along it. Shigaraki only seemed annoyed with the assault. Just as well, because Tamaki didn't think he could do that again as his arm flopped back onto the ground. Tamaki closed his eyes. A wind pushed past, rustling his hair, picking up dust. The moment feels so calm, and Tamaki knows. He knows this is his last moment. He can't help it. He lets out a sob as he continues to push back against the villain trying to kill him. He opens his eyes to see Shigaraki's other hand coming down. Closer, closer. Tamaki blinks, but Shigaraki is gone from his view. Tilting his head, he hears Shigaraki curse. He's crouched to Tamaki's right, a decent amount of distance between them suddenly. The Nomu running towards him. Tamaki panicked as it raced over to him, somehow not trampling him. The Nomu was picking Shigaraki up and standing to face towards Tamaki. Looking to his left, Tamaki sees blurred, teary versions of his mentor Fat Gum and newest intern, Red Riot. Choking back a sob as the two charge. Watching them, Fat Gum prepares to challenge the villain and the Nomu as Red Riot stands between the pro-hero and Tamaki. Red Riot turns to him and shouts, but it sounds muffled.
Don't close your eyes! Tamaki, are you alright?
Tamaki blinks and tries to ask again, but his body convulses as he coughs, spitting more blood onto the ground. More shouting, but Tamaki rolls back onto his back.
What's going on? Suneater! You! Get out of here!
Blinking the blood and grime out of his eyes, but each blink feels heavier. Each time it became harder and harder to keep his eyes open. The only thing Tamaki can hear clearly is the ringing in his ears. You still feel every injury inflicted upon him, but he turns his head away from Red Riot in search of the civilian. They're lying on the ground now, out of the rebels' way. Sighing, knowing they're no longer at risk of getting crushed, Tamaki glances at the fight, but the Nomu and Shigaraki are gone. Fat Gum is running over. He's saying something, and Tamaki tries to shake his head, but that proves to cause his head to spin, feeling his eyes roll up into his head. Tamaki wakes up in an uncomfortable bed. White sheets, white walls, blinds pulled shut. Tamaki has to blink a few times to get used to the light of the room. A card in the shape of a butterfly is on his bedside table. A yellow jacket that looks too much like Fat Gum's is resting on the back of a chair by Tamaki's bed. It's charred in some areas, and holes have been torn through it. Tamaki looks at his own body, one arm in a sling, one leg in a cast, and raised off the bed. It felt humiliating to be stuck like this. He groaned as he closed his eyes again. The door opens, Tamaki opening his eyes and turning to see who it is. Fat Gum and a nurse. His mentor looked tired, and thin. Too thin. Like he had used all his quirk and hadn't been eating to replenish it. The nurse nodded before leaving, and Fat Gum sighed, rubbing his eyes. Tamaki wanted to close his eyes and pretend he was still asleep. How could he face his mentor after failing like that? He'd been injured and hadn't managed to save the unconscious person trapped and most likely injured. But the thought of the civilian had Tamaki speaking up. His voice croaky, Fat Gum was at his side in an instant. Tamaki swallowed and tried again. Is that man, woman, alive? He's doing just fine. A small bump on the head. Fat Gum was taking the seat by his intern's bed. You did a great job with holding those two off on your own. Tamaki let out a shuddering breath. I thought I was going to die. Fat Gum pulled his chair closer to the bed and picked up the card. He showed it to Tamaki and read it. It was from Red Riot. It wasn't lengthy, but it was welcoming. Fat Gum pulled a lollipop from his jacket and handed it to Tamaki, who took it with a shaking hand. You're going to heal. Recovery girl has already been able to fix you up. She said you'd be ready to go in a day or so. But Fat Gum pulled another lollipop out for himself, but he just stared at it. Sir? Tamaki asked around the treat in his mouth. I'm so sorry. He glared at the sweet in his hand. You got injured on my watch. Tamaki wanted to say his mentor was technically around when the attack was happening, so it didn't necessarily happen on his watch. But Tamaki decided against saying that. You got to me. Not fast enough. Fat Gum sighed and lowered his hands into his lap. I could have saved you from a lot of pain if I'd been there sooner. Tamaki risked a glance at his mentor. The man had bags forming under his eyes. His usual smile was gone. He was definitely too thin. Is Kirishima all right? Fat Gum lifted his head to look at Tamaki. Yeah, he said he wanted to go do something. Didn't fill me in on what, but I didn't feel like forcing it out of him. Besides, I needed to be here when you woke up. Tamaki looked at his lap. You didn't need to be here for that. Okay, let me rephrase. I wanted to be here when you woke up. Tamaki pulled the lollipop from his mouth and stared at it. Have you been keeping up with your eating? He knew there was no point in asking, and there was no point in looking up at his mentor. He already knew the answer. His mentor didn't try to deny anything. Damn it, kids these days. Tamaki flinched at the words, but glanced at his mentor, who was smiling as he brushed his hair back from his face, only for it to land back in its original place. Who went and said you could be responsible? I'm the adult here. Beckham's laugh filled the little room, and Tamaki managed a weak smile. The laugh a little too loud, but he was happy everyone was okay, and he'd managed to do good. He made his mentor proud, though Tamaki also made him worried sick. Despite the circumstances that led up to this point, Tamaki enjoyed moments like these. Ones where he could spend time with Fat Gum, and the two could just be themselves. No peer pressure, or press pressure, or villains. He only hoped Kirishima would also be able to find joy in things as a hero. He was well and truly on his way to becoming a great hero.